So what is strategy? These are actually pencils that I got made and actually hand out to my students. What is strategy is actually a question that I ask on every exam. And even for students that I see a year later after they take my class, a lot of times I ask them in the hallway, what is strategy? So one of the outcomes from today is I'd really like for all of us to have a more common understanding of what it is and what it's not, a little bit about how it's difficult to do well, and then most importantly, perhaps not only how does it apply to my company, but also how does it apply to me as a professional. So one thing at MBA is that we always teach our students that executives are very impatient. And so you should always start with an executive summary, and that's what this is. Everybody on the call here today with me isn't business executive. You have very little time. Time is one of the few things that you cannot buy. And so if you're only to remember one page, is probably this one. This is the executive summary. So just reading here, it says, what is strategy? And I tried to summarize it for you and create kind of a spark notes. And what you can see is that it's a set of self-reinforcing activities, which gives you a sustainable competitive advantage. It's an economic moat that actually protects your profits. Importantly, it's not just what you're gonna do, but what are you not going to do? If you had a choice, I'd ask that you actually underline that. What are you not going to do? That's so important. It does require trade-offs, and usually it involves you doing something differently, not copying the competition. And then finally, the difference between business unit strategy and corporate strategy is that business unit strategy is really how to win, and corporate strategy is where you're going to compete. Probably one way to think about it is these 6 icons. So executives are very visual people. I'm sure most of the people here on the webcast are visual people. And so even if you don't remember, a year from now, if you forget most of what we talked about, no problem at all. Would really like for you to try to remember these 6 diagrams. And we're going to talk about it in detail, but starting on the top left, it's a circle. So strategy has something to do with a circle where it's like a continuous loop, it looks like, right? The middle on the top, you'll see kind of an arrow that splits. So in my mind, strategy has something to do with actually left side, right side, like making a decision. Strategy on the top right, it looks like, for the engineers in the audience, it looks like kind of diminishing returns, right? It's like good, 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 not so good, plateau. And that's kind of true about strategy. And the bottom left, it looks like a castle. It's an economic moat, M-O-A-T. And in the middle bottom, you can see 1, 2, 3. It's a very common kind of consulting framework. You start at 1 and you progress left to right. And then on the very bottom right, you can see that it's something about making decisions on where you want to go. Do you want to go north, south, east, or west? So once again, this is what is strategy, kind of the words. Before we talk about kind of what is strategy, why is it important? I know it's a fancy word. People say, oh, it's a strategic initiative. It must be important. But at the end of the day, why is it important? Why are we even talking about strategy? And one thing that I would suggest is there's a website that I like to go to a lot. It's called finviz.com, www.fin, like financial, viz, V-I-Z, like visualization, finviz.com. And there, it has a lot of functionalities. It's free, but there's actually 2 functions that I really like. One is the screener, which I'm going to show you, and then maps, map of the market. It's a really great way for you as kind of a strategist, as somebody who really pays attention to what goes on in different industries, to really get a pulse of what's going on, and it's really kind of an intuitive way to do it. And so my question is, like, really, why is strategy important? Well, in terms of profitability, 2/3 of companies lose money. So clearly, we've got to do something about that, right? One thing you might want to think about too is that if 2/3 of companies are actually losing money, that means that the average company out there is not a good role model for you, right? Like in terms of like best practices, you probably heard that phrase a lot, like best practices. The best practices aren't that great, right? Because the average company actually loses money, and actually copycatting them is probably not a great idea. So one question that I've gotten before is, to what extent does strategy apply to nonprofits? Or let's say you're a governmental organization, or you're a school or a hospital. To what extent does strategy apply to you? And I would argue that it super applies, right? Customers have more choice than ever. Students don't have to go to your university. They can go somewhere else. Patients don't have to go to your hospital. They can go somewhere else. And so if you really think about organizations really trying to be competitive and attract the right people, the right customers, and be able to sustain their mission and sustain what they're doing, strategy is more important than ever. So here's the first of the 6 kind of icons that I wanted for us to think about. And the idea is that strategy is like a set of activities. It's not one thing, it's multiple things, right? So you can't just say, oh, our strategy is to really reinforce our brand. That's just one thing, right? And it can't be, we really have a great distribution network and that's going to save us. And the point is probably not, right? So if strategy is a set of reinforcing activities that actually helps you to not just do one thing, but it works together to actually make you kind of more competitive and deliver more value to your clients. So one example that you might think about, and I really urge us to think about, is one that we use in business school quite a bit. For those of us that live in the United States, you might recognize Southwest, right? It's an airline company, but it's very different from some of the other ones. And I'd like to talk about, 1, how are they different? And then number 2, why is that hard to do? And then number 3, how that helps them to succeed. Strategy is really about trade-offs. So when you see this like fork in the road like this, if I could make a t-shirt, and maybe I will, it would say, have you made a trade-off today? And the point is, you really need to decide what you're not going to do. The days where you can serve all customers are gone. That's impossible. The days where you can please everyone, those days are gone. The days where you're good enough is better than the best person out there, those days are gone. So not only do you need to have a set of activities that are self-reinforcing, you need to decide, like, what do you not do? So one thing that you see a lot of times is that a good example would be this. You write a book, right? And your friend writes a book. And your friend writes a book, and the friend's book has a blue cover, right? It's a book, it's selling very well, and it has a blue cover. It's like you changing the color of your cover of your book, thinking that it would sell better, right? And actually, companies are guilty of this all the time, right? They benchmark, they use best practices, they do all these things to kind of chase the competition, when in reality, unless you're really willing to change the set of activities, you just have FOMO, and you're just changing the color of your book. So a lot of this discussion has to do with, how can you fundamentally think longer term and make trade-offs, do the hard things to win. Operational efficiency is not strategy. It's not. And maybe that seems obvious, right? But let's talk a little bit more about what defines operational efficiency and then what defines strategy. And that helps to kind of clarify kind of the difference, right? So here, the reason I chose this graph is the idea that, doing the same thing as your competition, like maybe even being a little bit better than them, crazy important, you should do it. If you're manufacturing and your competitor has 75% capacity utilization in their manufacturing facility, and you're 73%, yeah, you need to get better, right? If they're 75% and you can do 77%, of course you should do better. The argument here is not to throw away Lean or throw away Six Sigma or throw away, you need to do the basics. Of course you need to do the basics. But here's the point. Operational efficiency is not strategy. And the question is, why not? And the punchline is this. Operational efficiency is actually doing similar activities better than the rival. Strategy is different. Strategy is actually performing either different activities, doing something different than them, or doing the same activities differently. So if you're going to write down a couple words, one of the words you want to write down is the word different, differentiation, making trade-offs. And the idea is that, you know, you don't want to be different just because it's innovative or it's cool or it's anything like that. I mean, it's got to be differentiated in something that actually the customer and client values, right? So a lot of times in operations, we talk about CTQ, critical to quality. I mean, what is critical to quality, right? If the customer values it and you can compete differently, that is how you're going to win, right? So in summary, operational efficiency, doing the same thing as your competitors, a little bit better. Strategy, doing different things that your clients value. So a real simple way to think about it is on one side, business unit is how to compete. And on the other side, corporate strategy is where to compete. Another way to think about it is General Electric. It's been in the news a lot. I'm a big fan of General Electric. I actually own their stock. So you can console me later. But it's a storied brand, right? Company's been around for 125 years. They've done so many great things. I have a lot of great friends there, but they're in trouble, right? So it's a conglomerate. They actually do a lot of different things, right? They make jet engines. They make train locomotives. They make oil, gas, power equipment. They do healthcare. They do so many different things. And the corporate strategy question is, which one of those do you want to do? Does it make sense that you do all of them? You know, do you need to carve out part of it and give it to somebody else? Like, what is the synergy? What is the reason and what's the linkage between all those disparate businesses, right? So business unit strategy, very important. Corporate strategy, also very important, especially when you think about conglomerates, right? So as an example, like Samsung Electronics, they make appliances, computers, semiconductors, cell phones. They do all those things. But to me, the question is really on a corporate strategy, do all those things work together? And is there a reason for them to be together, right? Is the whole worth more than the sum of their parts? And so kind of the graphics or the icons that you might want to take a look at are these two. So from a business unit strategy, it's really around how, right? Like, how are we going to make decisions like Mary had talked about? How are we going to make decisions today that build on decisions we made yesterday, that give us the strategic flexibility to make incremental decisions tomorrow and next week that help to create this like system of activities in this economic moat around our castle, right? It's kind of how. Corporate strategy is really where. So Starbucks, they were founded in 1971. I was born in 1971. That's how I remember it. So Starbucks has been around for 47 years. But interestingly, they just went into Italy recently, like in the last 6 months. So like in New York City, right, there's a Starbucks like 3 on a corner, but they haven't been in Italy for 47 years. So that's like a corporate strategy question, right? We know how to make coffee. We know how to have a great experience. We know how to be the third place in the United States, but can we be in Italy? Can we be in Italy? And so that's a corporate strategy type question.